certainly is a marvelous and infinite grace that we have been the recipients of, isn't it? When we come to know Christ and the forgiveness of sin and all that God grants to us, when we realize who we are, where we've come from, and what we do not deserve, to know that God has been so gracious to us is just a wonderful, wonderful thing. And that's what we're looking at tonight, really. It's one of the things that Jesus struggled to communicate to those who listened to Him, was the concept of grace. And it was grace in salvation, which the Pharisees and religious leaders never got, but it was also grace in how you treat other people, how you live. And they didn't get that either. And the parable that we've been looking at recently, last week in particular, is all about that grace, is all about how God in His grace reaches out to lost, unworthy, rebellious sinners and enfolds us in His love and grace and draws us to Himself. And that's what this parable is all about. One of the greatest stories Jesus ever told. It's toward the end of His life, as we again set where we are in our Lord's life, within the last 3 months of His life, and He is still sparring with the Pharisees, but also instructing His disciples. And what we're going to see tonight is both. He is answering the Pharisees with this threefold parable of the lost sheep, coin, and son. And He is also teaching His disciples. He's teaching His disciples what it means to understand grace. And so there are wonderful lessons for us here about a grace kind of lifestyle. We've looked at the parable of the prodigal son. That's where we are tonight in Luke 15, so you might want to find your place there. Last week we looked at the fact that Jesus was telling this parable as a part really of a threefold parable to respond to the Pharisees who had said in verse 2, they were muttering, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." And that was not a commendation coming from them. They did not mean that as a good thing. They meant it really as a criticism, a condemnation of our Lord. And so Jesus is responding to that. And He responds really with a threefold parable that describes how much God loves lost people. And so in all three parts of the parable, something is lost in the sense that it is separated from its owner, or in the case of the Father, the one who had given him life, the one he was made in His image, separated from Him. And that which is separated is highly valued, cherished, and loved so much that an intense search is made for that lost object or person, or at least in the case of the Father, He's always watching for him to come back. And then there is great rejoicing when the lost is found. And that parable that Jesus is telling in three parts is designed to show the Father's love for the lost and respond to the Pharisees who did not understand that God loves sinners. And they didn't consider themselves in that category. And so they felt like Jesus ought to hang out with us. He ought to show more attention to us, not these publicans, tax collectors, and sinners. So last time we saw that the parable of the prodigal son represents for us, this instruction about the love of God represents a rebellious sinner, one who has purposely chosen to walk away from the love of the Father and live his life in utter rebellion against the values and standards that he knows have been established in his home by the Father. But then we see that he gets to the end of himself as he finds himself empty and alone and enslaved. He comes to the end of himself and he repents. He turns away from his sin, recognizes he is unworthy of even being a slave in his father's household, but he wants to go back to his father, so he returns to his father. And that is a repentant sinner. And then we saw the receiving Father, the one who welcomes him with love, with grace, and with joy, and restores him by giving him a robe to a place of honor, by giving him sandals to the position of a son, and by giving him a ring to the position of an heir. And so restores everything that this young man has thrown away. just graciously gives all of that to him. And there's great joy in the household. Now, up till this point, Jesus has been talking about the publicans and sinners, the people that he's accused of spending too much time with. Okay, that's who the rebellious son, the prodigal son, refers to. But as I said in closing last time, I'm convinced that when Jesus gets to verse 25, he turns his gaze to the Pharisees. So just imagine being in the audience, and Jesus has been talking about the prodigal. He's been talking about the tax collectors and sinners. And then verse 25. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. And I think, of course I'm guessing, I'm supposing, I don't know for sure, but I just think Jesus probably looked squarely at the Pharisees. And what he's communicating to them is the story turns here, and we're no longer talking about a rebellious sinner. We're talking about a respectable sinner. We're talking about you. We're talking about you Pharisees. And I'm convinced he looked right at them as he told this part of the story. Let's read a few of the verses and then we'll comment on some of the characteristics of this older son. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. Now imagine yourself being one of the Pharisees listening to this, okay? There are so many parallels between this older brother and them, and even what has led up to this. So the older brother will not go in. Father goes out to plead with him. Verse 29, but he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and have never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. My son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. Now, it's quite easy to see who the older brother represents. He represents the Pharisees. What are some of the characteristics you see of the older brother in the way he responds and what he does? What characteristics do you see of him? Pride. Okay. Where do you see pride in what he does? The way he answered his dad. Okay. All right. Self-centered. Yeah. Jealousy. All right. Self-righteous. Okay. All right. What else? What else do you see in this young man? Resentment. Yeah. Confusion. Yes. Yeah. Greg? Pardon me? Envy. Okay. Yeah. He has a desire to please his father. Okay. That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
In this, this is his brother. Does he ever say anything positive about his other brother returning? That he is safe, that he's glad to see him come back?
There's no evidence that he feels that at all. There's no evidence that he says anything positive about his brother coming back, which is at the real heart of the story. That absence of any recognition that this is a good thing, that we celebrate this rebellious son coming back. The absence of that thought is exactly what Jesus is driving at. Okay, anything else about the older brother you see? Okay, you mentioned a lot of great things. I'm just going to summarize them under 3, and I'm not sure I'll capture all the great answers that you gave to that question. But at least these 3 pop up. One is his self-righteousness, and that was mentioned in a couple of different ways. Self-righteousness. Don't you see it even in the tone? I mean, you can just almost hear the tone of voice in what he says. Look. Okay, that tone of disrespect toward his father to start with. All these years I've been slaving for you. In other words, I've worked all these years, and he says, I've never disobeyed your orders. Okay, that's self-righteousness. He's looking at himself saying, I've been the good guy. I've never run off and done bad stuff like my brother had. I'm good. I've been here and I've worked hard, and I've never disobeyed your orders. Outwardly, he has stayed within the structure and confines of the home, hasn't he? Outwardly. He has. So, self-righteousness, even in the way he refers to his brother, don't you see that in verse 30? This son of yours. Ooh. It's not my brother. This son of yours. I'm not even going to call him my brother. I've disowned him like you should have, Dad. That's the idea. He's not my brother. I don't claim him. You can claim him if you want to, but not me. This son of yours. See the self-righteousness in that? Looking down on this young brother because of what he's done. And yes, the young brother had done some awful things. Some awful things. Just like the tax collectors and sinners who came to hear Jesus preach. And the Pharisees were guilty of the very same attitude. Well, I've never done those kind of things. Remember the story Jesus, well, we haven't gotten to it yet, but you'll remember it, I'm sure. In Luke 18, Jesus told the story about the publican and the Pharisee who go into the temple to pray. And the publican, or the tax collector, is praying on one side and the Pharisee's on the other. And what's the Pharisee praying? I thank you that I am not like other people, like this tax collector over here. Okay, self-righteousness. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I possess. Focus on all that I do. Self-righteousness. It's exactly what this brother's saying. Look at what I've done. I've worked for you. I've slaved for you. And look at what I haven't done. I've never disobeyed your orders. That's the mark of a legalist. Tallying up what I have done good, what I haven't done bad. And that's exactly where the Pharisees were. Self-righteous. Okay? So his self-righteousness is very obvious. You mentioned this one as well. His pride. His pride is very obvious in the way that he speaks. I've been slaving for you. I've never disobeyed your orders. Again, focus on himself and what he has done, what he hasn't done. I've been the good one. And this son of yours, again, the pride in what he has done or what he hasn't done is very obvious. And then you mentioned this one as well, envy, his envy. What is he envious of? The cow. Yeah, his father's treatment of the brother. Yeah, it is kind of the cow too, isn't it? Because he says, "You didn't even give me a goat, and you the fattened calf for him. Come on, I thought that was going to be for Christmas or something, or I guess it'd be Hanukkah. But and you killed a fatted calf for him." He's envious. Anything else you think he's envious of? Attention? Yeah. Yeah, envious of the attention. The love the Father has for the one that came back. Yeah. Yeah. Celebration. He's envious of the celebration. You never gave me a party for my friends. Yeah.
He's probably thinking the Father gave his son half of his inheritance, but when he came back, he's going to probably get half of the older brother's money.
Yeah. He comes back and you've given him, well, he may not know yet that he's given him the sandals and the robe and the ring, but he'll find that out. But he's probably suspicious that, does he get back in on the inheritance now? Yeah. Yeah, is he going to be written back in the will? It's a lot he's probably envious of. There have been some who have suggested that he may have even been envious of the things his brother did while he was gone. Kind of in a backhanded way. You notice what he says. He says, when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes, that's the first time prostitutes has ever been mentioned in the story. Now, it may well have happened, but it's not mentioned in the story. He squandered with riotous living or wild living, so it probably included that, and maybe he was just supposing that. But there have been some who have written on this who have suggested that maybe all the time his brother has been gone, he's been imagining in his mind what he would like to do if he were out there. And so that's in his mind when his brother comes back. Maybe he's been envious of the opportunity to sow some wild oats that he's never had the opportunity to do, or never taken the opportunity to do, but it's been in his mind. Now, one of the reasons I say that is because that certainly was characteristic of the Pharisees. Over and over again, Jesus would tell them, you're like whitewashed tombs. Remember when he said that in Matthew 23? You look good on the outside, but inside full of dead men's bones. And remember when he would say to them that out of the heart comes evil things, not what you put into your body, all of your food laws you think make you holy. That's not what makes you holy. And sin comes from within. Doesn't have to do with what you take in by way of food. So certainly that was true of the Pharisees, and I think it may be represented in this older brother as well. But certainly Jesus is getting across the Pharisees and who they are with this picture of the older brother. And it's a striking similarity because they accuse Jesus back in verse 2 of what? Eating with tax collectors and sinners. In the story, he does not want to go in to eat with the younger brother. His father is throwing a banquet for him, and he doesn't want to go near that. See? And it's almost an exact parallel of what Jesus was being accused of. You eat with these people? Not us. And here's the older brother. You mean you're giving a party for him? We're not going in there, or I'm not going in there. See, it's just a real direct parallel there. And I'm sure they got it. I'm sure they knew exactly what Jesus was talking about. Now, notice one other thing that Jesus says about the older brother in verse 31. My son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. Now, there's a sense in which that represents the religious leaders. They were in a privileged position. Paul talks about that in Romans 9. Because they were Jews, they had a covenant relationship with God. They had the promises. They were entrusted, as Paul says in Romans 9, with the oracles of God, the very Word of God, the very words of God. They had tremendous privileges. All of the blessings of the nation of Israel, they had all of that. They were in a privileged position to be, in that sense, in the Father's household. But in spite of being in that position, they were 1,000,000 miles away from the Father's heart. They did not understand that the Father loved the rebellious sinner, the younger brother. And they couldn't grasp that. And so that's why they criticized him hanging out with the publicans and sinners. That's the reason for that. But I think there's a sense in which Jesus is portraying, you had all of these blessings, and you didn't even realize what you had. But in the midst of all of that, you had no understanding of the Father's heart. That we should celebrate and rejoice and be glad because what was lost is now found. Quite a story, isn't it? Both perspectives of the prodigal and of his brother. Both perspectives are powerful in communicating who God is and what His heart is like, and how easy it is to distance ourselves from the heart of God, even when we're very close in the household. And, we have to be careful of that. We have to be careful of that as followers of Christ. We have to be careful that we don't begin to think of ourselves as the good people, who are not involved in what the rest of the world's involved in, and begin to look down our nose at sinners. We're all sinners. Some of us are rebellious sinners, some of us are respectable sinners, but we're all sinners. And that's what the older brother didn't understand. Okay. Anything else you want to talk about here? Yes, Walt?
Pastor, according to the story, and as you have semi-stated, God loved those Pharisees because everything that He had prepared. It sounds like to me that Jesus came down on them so hard because He loved them, yet they been abused.
Yeah.
And that's why He came down so hard. They had no love.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right, Walt. He did come down hard on them because they squandered the privileges and blessings they had. He did love them. He did love them. And His rebukes of them come from a heart of love. Another reason He was so hard on them is because they were supposed to be guiding the nation religiously, spiritually, and they had totally wrecked that responsibility. They were supposed to be the shepherds of the people of Israel, and they had led them astray. Again, in that 7 woes in Matthew 23, that time when He really blasted the Pharisees, He called them blind guides of the blind. He said, "You're the blind leading the blind. And you should have been showing the blind the way, but you're leading them into the ditch. You're blind too." And that was one of the reasons He was so hard on them, because they had such responsibility and they missed it. And the Bible teaches that if you have privilege, you have greater responsibility. If you have the responsibility to lead people into spiritual truth, you have a much greater responsibility on you, and they had ruined it. They had just ruined it. And so He really came down hard on them. He did love them, yes. He did love them. Kisty?
And they completely missed the heart of God in the Abrahamic covenant in the second part of it, where, His goal was not just for Israel, but for the Gentiles.
Exactly. Great point. The second part of the Abrahamic covenant that Kisty was referring to, God told Abraham that He would bless him, but that through him He would bless other nations and bless others. And Israel, and particularly in this time, in Jesus' day, the religious leaders had missed that second part of it. All they were concerned about was being in the place of blessing themselves and not being a blessing to others, and realized that because of their privileges, they were to share that with others. And some of those others were their own people, who were the tax collectors and sinners. And they had missed that part of what God wanted to do through the Abrahamic covenant with them.
I think a lot of times we miss it ourselves.
Yeah.
I think within the story itself, my brother passed away and different things in my life. I had to really get down on knees every time. Just God forgive me.
Yeah, we do miss it. We have a tendency, we all have a tendency to become inflicted with pride. I mean, that was the sin that caused Satan to fall from his position, and so it's something that he uses very effectively with us. It's very easy for us. You're right, Tommy, to get the same attitude as the older brother. David? Yes. Yes. That is very interesting, isn't it? That, the older son. Yes. Yep. He sure is. Verse 32, he says he calls him this brother of yours, not this son of mine, this brother of yours. That's an interesting observation, that he does remind the older son that this is his brother. Yeah. And, Jesus is no doubt reminding the Pharisees that, these publicans and sinners that you're criticizing me being with, they're also the children of Abraham. Racially, they're Jews too. They deserve every bit as much opportunity to receive the grace of God. And you're excluding them from that. Okay, very good. Anything else? Question, observation on the story of the prodigal and his brother? Yes, sir. Yes. Yes. It was a poet by the name, I believe, of Thompson, I think was his name, that wrote a poem. I've got it in my files. It's called The Hound of Heaven, and he wrote it after some very troubling circumstances in his own life. And it talks about how the hound of heaven continued to chase him as far down as he had gotten. God never gave up on him. And Michael Card wrote a song using that phrase, the hound of heaven, and kind of popularized, at least in the Christian music industry, that poem. But yeah, that's a beautiful picture of God never giving up on us. I can remember some of the poem. I fled him down the nights of tears. I fled him over the many years, or something like that. I kept fleeing from him, running as far away as I could from him. But when I would turn around, he was always there on my steps. The hound of heaven was following me. And it's just a great picture. And it does. You're right, John. It does picture the same thing that Jesus is talking about here. Okay, let's move on into chapter 16 then. Chapter 16, Jesus begins to instruct His disciples. The Pharisees are still hanging around because we'll see them in verse 14. They're hearing what He's saying, but it's interesting that Jesus now turns to His disciples and is going to press home some truths about commitment to them. So He's going to do some teaching on commitment with the disciples. There's this interesting, almost, I wish I could be there to see the setting. There's a mixed group here. There are Pharisees, there's a multitude of people who are following Him, and then there's the disciples. And there are times when you get the impression that even in the midst of that great multitude, Jesus kind of zeroes in on His disciples. And He's focusing on them as He's teaching, and that's what you see here. In verse 1, Jesus told His disciples, and He's going to talk to them about commitment. First of all, though, He's going to give them a negative illustration of commitment. This is a very interesting illustration. Let's read it, and then we'll make a few comments on it and give you opportunity to talk about it some. There was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, "What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer." Okay, let's stop right there and get the setting, get the scene here. You've got a very rich man who has a manager. Now, that word conjures up different things for us today than it would in Bible times. When you think of a manager today, you're thinking of either a sports star or an entertainment star, someone who takes care of all their stuff for them and does their publicity and makes their schedule and things like that. And that's not really the same concept here. This manager really is one who manages the household for this rich man. really a word that we might use today would be he was his accountant. This was his accountant. He took care of all his finances. He was his financial planner, if you will. And so that's the idea here. He managed all of his business affairs, is what this guy does. And as you can see, he's being accused of mismanagement, financial impropriety, and so he's called in, and the owner, the rich man, the boss, basically says to him, You've been accused of misappropriating funds. I'm firing you, and you give me one last accounting for what you've done. I want one more balance sheet. I want one more report of the finances before you leave. But you're done. You can't be the manager. You're fired, basically, is what he says. So that's the scene. Now notice what this man does in verse 3. The manager said to himself, "What shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg." So you can just see the guy's frantic, and he's weighing his options. Okay, all right, I'm losing my job. What am I going to do? I can't do manual labor, and I'm too proud to beg. So he's kind of sifting through his options here. What can I do? And all of a sudden, he has this aha moment. He gets this sudden inspiration. Now I got it. This is what I'll do. Verse 4. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. Now, basically, what he's doing is I'm going to do something to gain the favor of those who owe debts to my master. I mean, I run the financial picture here. People who owe debts to him, I'm going to do something that will put me in their good graces and make me look good so that when I lose my job, they'll take care of me. I'll get another job offer. Okay, now look at what he does. Verse 5. So he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, "How much do you owe my master?" 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. Cut it in half." Okay, verse 7. Then he asked the second, "And how much do you owe?" 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, "Take your bill, make it 800. Now, what's this guy doing? Cheating? Cheating his master? Okay. What's his angle? I'm sorry? Looking for gifts from other people? Pity from other people. Yes. Okay? Okay, ingratiating himself with these people. He's making himself look good. There are some who suggest that basically what he was cutting was only his commission. That was typical for a financial manager like this, a manager of a household, to get a cut of everything that came in. And so he may have just been cutting out his commission and still giving to his boss everything that would actually be owed to him. Whether or not that's the case is hard to say. But at any rate, he is obviously making himself look good to the people who owe stuff to his master. He's making himself look kind, gracious, helpful. And he may be cheating his master, or he may just be cutting out his own wages because he knows he's going to get fired anyway, and he's trying to set himself up for the future. He's trying to get on the good side of these people who owe so that they'll have pity on him and offer him a job when they hear he's fired. Okay, that seems to be what he's doing here. He may be trying to make his master look cruel, like, he was overcharging you, really. You really shouldn't have to pay that much. And he comes out looking like the hero. This guy really helped me out. is what the people who owe are going to be thinking. So he's setting himself up for the future, basically, is what he's doing. So look at what happens in verse 8. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. I imagine when the master heard what had happened, he probably laughed. He probably laughed and said, "That is one sharp guy." I mean, he's not commended for what he did because it was dishonest, but he's commended for his cleverness, for his shrewdness in preparing for his future, in setting himself up to where he would be taken care of. Okay? This guy's pretty shrewd. This guy's pretty clever. That's what his master says when he finds out what has happened. And then Jesus goes on to add, and we'll get to this in just a moment, for the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. Jesus is going to make a point from this, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But any comment or question about the unjust steward, as he's called, or in the King James, or the shrewd manager? Never knew what this was talking about? Okay. I'm not sure I do either, but we'll try to get at it here in a minute. It's an unusual story. And there have been some who have said, well, why would Jesus use a crook as an example? What good example comes out of this? Yes, Holly? Okay. Huh. Right. Uh-huh. Right. Uh-huh. Yes. Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that really is the point that Jesus is going to make. We haven't gotten into verse 9 yet, but this is the point that Jesus is really going to make, is that, you know, the guy's not commended for being dishonest. There was something about what he did that was dishonest. That's clear in the text. And whether or not we understand all the cultural stuff going on, I'm not sure. But there was something he was doing that was dishonest. He was portraying things in a light which they really weren't, in other words. But he was very clever in what he did to prepare for his future. And that's what he's commended for. Now, Jesus is going to use that as an illustration of a positive kind of commitment. And let's go ahead and move on to that, because I think Holly's on to something there. Jesus is going to talk about positive evidences of commitment here. And the first one he talks about is a commitment to investing in the lives of others. Now, look at what Jesus says in verse 9. He says, I tell you, and this is the point Jesus is drawing from this story, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Okay, now let's unpack this a little bit. You almost have to pick this apart piece by piece. Jesus is commending the shrewd manager, not because of any illegal stuff that he may have done or anything wrong he may have done, but because of his cleverness, his shrewdness in using what was available to him to prepare for his future. Okay, that's the point. He used what was available to him, the means that he had available. You know, he says, I can't beg, I can't do manual labor, so what are the means I have? I've got a sharp mind, I can figure this out. And he makes this deal to prepare for his future, to ingratiate himself with the people who owed his master. Now, Jesus' point is, we as believers need to take whatever means we have available to prepare for the future. But He's not talking about our future here. He's not talking about make sure you're preparing and angling yourself to get another job or to prepare for yourself to get a windfall of some kind. Notice he twists the whole point around at the end of verse 9. Use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves so that when it is gone, in other words, when there's no more opportunity to gain worldly wealth, okay, which means this life is done, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. So what kind of friends is he talking about making? Temporary? Christian? I may have slid by this too fast here. Use your wealth to make friends so that you will be welcomed to eternal dwellings. Obviously, or evidently, what Jesus is saying is we ought to take whatever means we have available and use it to win people to Christ, to make friends that will then welcome us into eternal dwellings when we leave this life and have no more opportunity to earn money, to gain wealth. And so I think what he's talking about is, okay, the guy in the story used whatever he had at his disposal to prepare for his future. And Jesus is saying, use whatever you have to prepare for eternity. And if you're going to influence people and buy people who will treat you well in the future, make sure it's people who will welcome you into heaven. Because you used what you had available to you to get people to heaven. I think that's the point that he's making. Use every opportunity to influence people, to win people to Christ, to gain friends that will welcome you into eternal dwellings, so that when the day comes, when your life ends and you can't earn any more money here, you know what you've got left? The only thing you've got left is what you sent ahead to heaven. Investment in souls. Exactly. And whatever rewards we have in heaven because of investments we've made that were eternal in nature. So I think that's the point. And Jesus really is talking about a commitment to invest in the lives of others spiritually. To use whatever we have. If it's time, if it's persuasive skills, if it's money, if it's opportunity, in whatever way it may work itself out in your life, use whatever is at your disposal to influence people for eternity. Because that's the only thing that counts. That's the only thing that lasts. And so, how do we prepare for our future like this guy cleverly prepared for his future? We prepare for our future by making sure that we'll be welcomed into heaven by people that are there because of us. Those are the kind of friends we made. Al?
I think that's what Dan was saying Sunday. We do it with an eternal perspective.
Exactly. It goes exactly back to what Dan was talking about Sunday. It's an eternal perspective. That everything we do has that perspective of, is this going to last? Is this going to be eternal? And so, the point, and we've got to go here, but the point is, I think, whatever you do, whatever job you work, whatever funds you have that God's given you, whatever opportunities time-wise God's given you, make sure that you're using everything God's given you at your disposal to make an eternal impact. You know, so it doesn't mean, well, now wait a second, John, I work 50 hours a week on a secular job. There's nothing eternal about that, is there? Yes, there is. Yes, by all means there is. Keep an eternal perspective on why God has you in that place, on that job. Think about the people He's got you around and how you can impact them for eternity. Think about the opportunities He's given you, even in your job, to do things and to influence people and all of that to make an eternal impact. I mean, that's what He's talking about here. Use whatever is available to you to win friends for eternity, so that they'll welcome you into eternal dwellings. And that's just a powerful illustration of commitment, being committed to investing in the lives of others. So whatever you're doing, commit yourself to invest in the lives of others. Okay? We'll talk about some of the other commitments next week.